This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics. The content is of an adult nature and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licensed Podcast. I'm Shauna and I'm in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
I'm Leo in London.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here.
We're joined by Nikita for this guest edition of the podcast, and it's lovely to have you along. Hiya.
It's lovely to be here. Nice to meet you both.
What drove you to want to be here?
I guess your goal for the podcast really aligns with my values and my beliefs. So when I'd listened to you both speaking about being autistic ADHDers and therapists, that was something that I really felt was missing not too long ago. So I think it's a conversation that isn't often had. I think that there's so much that we bring and different experiences that we have. So just the opportunity to talk about that, and I guess I'd hope that someone might listen and, like me, kind of relate to the things that were being talked about and know that the workplace is totally okay for them to be in. It's not, sometimes we can feel like we don't have a right to be there. So I think I was hoping to sort of give people the message that we exist.
Lovely.
Perfect.
Yes. And Nikita, you actually first got in touch with us a good number of months ago, and it's really lovely the way, another thing that we try and do with the podcast and with the people we're relating to and bringing on as guests is just normalise that things in an autistic way just take their time, and then when they come together, they come together. And so it's lovely to see that kind of playing out as well. Would you like to give us a sense of how you see yourself right now in the world? And it doesn't have to be what you do, it can be absolutely anything, just to orientate us and give us a kind of a starting point of something you're comfortable beginning with.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, because if you'd have asked me this question a year ago, it'd have probably been very different. I think right now I see myself as somebody who is coming out of a period of quite a big burnout and going back into life and into work, I think.
Okay.
So I think for me it's a period of change and trying to readjust and recognising that the way that I was living wasn't necessarily working for me, and sort of a time of grief and acceptance kind of running alongside each other. I think previously I would have described myself as a people pleaser, overachieving, and really just kind of wanted to fit. And I think now I find myself less wanting to fit and more embracing who I am and kind of challenging that internalized ableism and thinking who I am isn't so bad and different isn't bad. So I think without going too much into work, obviously there's a whole identity there. And I think sometimes that's harder to figure out, is what it means to be an autistic person has been easier for me to think about than what it means to be an autistic professional. And that's been...
That's interesting. Okay, yes.
Because of the field that you work in?
Yeah, I think so. And I think,
broadly speaking, is psychology. I know you haven't labelled that, but it's relevant, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as well, being a trainee clinical psychologist, it's the trainee bit and the awareness that I'm at such an early point in my career that I really feel like I've had to really think about disclosure and think about how much I'm comfortable with people knowing. So whereas in my life I can show up and be whoever I am in the fullest sense. I think it's been harder to figure out at work how much of this I can bring, and that'll differ between like who I'm talking to, different placements. About to head into a placement in an adult autism assessment team where it's already feeling okay to be me, but it's different across the different placements.
Yeah. Have you found difficulties in any of those in your professional life around either actually having disclosed or deciding not to because of particular worries or concerns that you have about what that would mean?
Yeah, I think one of my first experiences of disclosing, and it was really, really low level disclosure, kind of put me off for the future, I think. So I'd asked for a reasonable adjustment in terms of, could I have a quieter room to take phone calls, because it's really hard for me to focus on what someone's saying to me on the phone while there's all of this background stuff going on. At that point, I didn't know I was autistic, so I just said it helps with auditory processing, because I knew that I had specific learning difficulties, and that auditory processing was one of those things where I could do with a bit more support, like a quieter environment. And at the time, my supervisor I don't know whether it was just a bad day but we'd had this conversation, and it turned into, I need to see your specific learning difficulties assessment report. And I said, this feels really uncomfortable. Like, could I give you it but blank out the percentiles, because that feels really personal. And it was a really upsetting supervision, and got to the point where basically my supervisor had said, like, I have a duty of care to patients and I need to make sure they're safe. And I thought, how did we get from me asking for a room to you being concerned that I'm not cognitively able to do this job? So I think that kind of made me very aware, because not everybody is safe to disclose to. Yeah, I think maybe over time I'm not so worried now that I have a place on training. That's kind of where you're trying to get. And I feel like perhaps I can say a little bit more and advocate for myself. And I think how I'd respond to that would be very different now. I think I might have had something to say in reply, but I just remember at the time feeling a little bit heartbroken that someone could think.
Not surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all stories like that come up all the time, but it's heartbreaking every time because it's so unnecessary.
Yeah. And I don't think if my supervisor knew what that had felt like, that they would have approached it like that. I think they genuinely were just trying to do what they think was best. But I don't think that was necessarily what was best for me or for the people that I work with either. No.
And not in not to use the word in an insulting way at all, but just literally it's ignorance.
Yeah.
And as we've all said at the beginning, lack of exposure to people like us, visible and normalised, as you were saying.
Normalised, yes. I'm noticing the contrast between you at the beginning of your career and the way that it has been for Leo and I in terms of our age and stage, where there's been years of working. In fact, I was out of the workplace before I identified as autistic and never went through any of that, and actually never asked for accommodations, whether it was due to being diagnosed or not. I never even considered asking for accommodations, because I just considered the issue was me and I had to deal with it. So it's a different approach, but you're coming into this conversation, and you're representative of people that Leo and I don't represent, and there's maybe like a generational thing, and age and stage of noticing and familiarizing yourself with your own autism that makes a difference. But I can really appreciate that the trickiness and the sensitivity about the timing for you, Nikita, of coming out at this stage rather than when you've got 10 or 20 years behind you, which is also a challenge, but it's just a different one. Yeah.
I think it was as well, like I've known people who were further on in their career who, like my supervisor won't mind me saying, my current supervisor is autistic, which is just amazing in itself to have an openly autistic supervisor. But their experience of training was very different to mine because they also weren't diagnosed at that point and just felt like they had to try and push through. I think knowing that I was autistic earlier, I think after you get the diagnosis, it suddenly feels like you have this rush of self-acceptance, and then you think, well, the thing I need to do now is unmask. And then you start recognizing all of these things that suddenly aren't easy anymore because you've admitted that they were never easy in the first place. So it's hard to put that mask back on. And I almost wonder if it had been different for me to go through training having never disclosed any of this. And I don't think that would necessarily be a good idea either. It would be a different kind of difficult. But I think I find myself now recognizing all of these things that just sometimes feel impossible and that I wish I hadn't recognized in the first place. And then you sort of have this choice. Do I just push through or do I try and change something? And that's a lot of pressure as well, isn't it? Sometimes, especially, I think there's not always a lot you can do other than just speak about it and hope that what you're saying is received with compassion.
Yes.
That's right.
A different kind of difficult might be a good title for this episode.
So far.
That's really lovely. You mentioned before, it sounded like you already had either a diagnosis or a recognition of a learning difficulty, in particularly audio processing you mentioned. So if you want to talk about it, what is your history of getting to the point of autism in your life? How young were you when there were differences that were either that you felt or that were pointed out, or what's that journey been?
So it's different in terms of when they were informally pointed out and formally pointed out, I guess. My parents would say that I've always been a little bit quirky or different. Like from being a kid, I would prefer to speak to the teachers than kids. And I was doing okay in school, but there was always that school report that was that I could be trying a little bit harder and not reaching my full potential, and I don't contribute to class discussions or things like that. And a lot around like getting up out of your seat and just needing to walk around more. But because I was quite academic, I guess it wasn't really an issue for people around me, and it wasn't a lot wasn't known about what autism and girls, like what that looks like. So I guess through school I kind of got by, had the bullying through secondary school, and I guess came into CAMS at the end of like my teenage years. And then I think it's a story that we'll have heard quite a bit, ended up with numerous different labels over time. And I guess it wasn't until I'd got to university, which happened for me after a failed attempt at moving down to London and going to drama school. Such a big transition at 18, it just didn't work out. But after struggling, that was what brought me to psychology. And then being in uni and studying psychology, I very quickly got interested in neuropsychology and brains and what's this executive function, and like recognizing it myself, I think. And I'd always massively struggled with maths, so it was the thought around dyscalculia that first led me to go for an assessment. And then it kind of dominoed from there. So in the assessment, they'd said, you've got a bit of a spiky profile, so it might be worth getting an autism and ADHD assessment. And I was like, at that point, I was thinking, no, I'm not autistic. Like, I don't like trains. I'm not good at maths. So that one skipped me. And I was thinking, I'm not very like hyperactive in terms of like physically hyperactive. I don't need to be moving a lot. And then as I learned more about these sorts of things and through my degree, I sort of had to broach it with myself in terms of, I'll do an assessment on misdiagnosis of autism in women and girls, just for my degree, not for me, but also like recognising all of these things at the same time. Applied for a PhD broadly in the area of autism, but got my first assistant psychologist job at the same time, so didn't end up going down that route. But I guess I'd kind of known myself for about a year before I told anybody else. I was scared that my parents especially might be like, no, like you're just quirky, like you can't say things like that. And then that was initially what my mum had said. She was like, but you're so chatty, you give me eye contact. And then I'd showed her the Autistic Girls Network paper on internal presentations of autism, and she was like, oh yeah, no, I see this.
Yes.
And now it's got to the point where we look back at old family videos and we're all like, how did we miss it? Like, I've always been autistic, which obviously is the case, but it was kind of that process of going through university and then starting to work with autistic clients as an assistant psychologist and recognizing that it just felt so easy compared to like having to mask my way through interactions. So it felt peer reviewed by the time I went for my assessment.
Okay.
That's a great term, isn't it? Peer reviewed. Absolutely. Actually, it counts. It absolutely counts. And
there was a meme on one of my clients sent to me on Facebook or wherever that said, why isn't the main part of an autism assessment being put in a room with another autistic person and see how quickly you bond? That's what you were describing with those clients that you were in contact with. It was easy.
Yeah. And I've always mentioned it as like kind of it being a strength in that sometimes I have to mask enough to kind of connect with neurotypical clients. But when I unmask, I can also connect with autistic clients, and people don't always find that so easy. And before we'd agreed to do this podcast, I'd read up on both of your websites, and I think you described it as being fluent in neurotypical, but
neurodivergent is my native tongue. Yes.
Yeah, and that's the perfect explanation of how it felt.
Hang on a second, though, Leo. Did you not rip that off from someone?
Oh, I saw it somewhere. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where, so I can't even credit whoever came up with it.
Not Max that says that?
Really?
I think it might be a Marxism.
Yeah, I definitely lifted it, but it stuck with me from somewhere. One more thing, that you mentioned dyscalculia before, and I remember bringing that up in my assessment as well, because I cannot cope with the conceptual nature of numbers. It's just too far removed from real life. And his basically, quick test to rule me out, which he did, was just a sequence of numbers and putting them in order. And if you can do that, or even to have a concept of more than and less than, and that was kind of the bar, which I felt, well, okay, I can do those things, but that's really basic. Do you have a different understanding of that?
Oh gosh, yeah, that is such a simplified version. And I mean, I know that dyscalculia research and the evidence base is so much behind dyslexia.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah, it is things like, and it's such an overlap. Things like time and how you conceptualize time. But like with me, I still struggle with clocks that is it analog?
My daughter can't do those.
Analog with hands.
Normal
Yeah. So thank goodness for digital, because I wouldn't be able to do it. But and so much more than that. It can even link to things like spatial awareness. I guess it's really hard when you start looking at all of these things that you've struggled with to section them off, because there's such an overlap. Because I also now, my most recent diagnosis is dyspraxia, which is no shock to anybody. I was the clumsiest waitress ever. But yeah, there's such an overlap, but it's more than just kind of not having nice sequences of numbers. It's I guess kind of struggling with everything around numbers. Yeah, for me, it takes me forever. It doesn't mean I can't do it. It just takes me forever to work out change in my head. Like if I've got £2 and something is £1.35, it would take me a long, long time to figure out whether I'd got the right change back.
Yeah. Leo, you just have your own way of doing maths though, because I've seen you do maths and I've tried to work, yes, I have. And I've tried to work out what it is that you're doing. And you do it in your own way, but you do it.
Sometimes there are posts that are put up in the neurodivergent Facebook groups and so on, and saying, this is how I do this sum. People tell me that's a weird way to do it. And that does seem to be a thing. And I do remember very specifically, so this would have been junior school, so I was probably 8 or 9, something like that. And the teacher said, just verbally, you know, here's a simple sum. Do you know the answer? And we all kind of knew the answer. And she said, now, what you don't know is what you did in your head to get there. And she wrote out on the board what we did in our head. And it had nothing to do with what I'd done. What I had done was 10 times longer, but made absolute sense to me. You know, it's so much more. And obviously this is also maybe particularly ADHD as well, but a very visual way of, I like symmetry, and I make patterns in my head of things that also can represent numbers. That's what I mean by it's too conceptual for me. I can't deal with just flat conceptual maths in its pure form, which I love the idea of.
So we'd been doing our GCSEs since year 8. They'd trialled our year going really early for GCSEs.
Oh my goodness.
So I'd resat, and I kept saying, like, please, they're making me do foundation papers, which is sort of the easier.
Allows you to get a C or something, that you get a pass.
Gotcha.
But when it comes to the logic behind stuff, that's what I understand. I might not get the numbers and the easy sums, but I get the concepts.
Yeah.
So I was like, please just switch one paper to higher, because then you can bump your grade up. It doesn't just get capped at a C. And the first time that I'd sat one foundation paper, one higher paper, I ended up with a B, and that was in year 10. And I was like, I don't want to do maths ever again. And my mum was like, you don't have to. I've seen how this has stressed you out. Like, you're done. But I guess that's something that maybe people wouldn't expect, is you can be dyscalculic and get a B in GCSE maths.
That's right.
That's
right.
what you were speaking about with the working out and showing you might not have got the right answer, but I knew the process.
Yeah. And most schools will not. You had to ask for that, because you could see that even at that young age. But most schools, they won't put in one of their supposedly weaker students for a higher paper, because they don't understand that the marks you can get on that could actually offset the marks on the what they call foundation, which is not your foundation, actually.
Yeah, so much harder. I'd actually got by for the whole of year 7, because I was sat next to one of my really good friends. I was in top set. Don't know how that happened, but I just copied from my friend's book for the whole year, and they didn't realise until they changed the seating plan. They were like, oh, she's really struggling.
Yes. So, where are we going to go now?
What about here's a question I will ask all new clients, all new people that I work with, is where's your joy? Where do you find joy in your life as it is at the moment?
So many different places, actually, which is really good to say. I'm in a really good spot with joy at the moment. I love the beach. I will always find joy at the beach. I love being there. I'll take a book, probably a psychology one. Don't really do anything that's not a textbook these days. But I just love it. So I guess 2 things there. My job in psychology, as long as it aligns with my interests, and matcha lattes. Yeah, I guess I'm a big nerd, and I just really like reading about different therapeutic approaches. And yeah, I thought that sounds a bit sad, doesn't it? But that's
not to us.
No,
not to us or our listeners, I would dare say.
Yeah, and our work is our special interest.
Of course, absolutely.
And it's definitely for stages, and different aspects of it. Yeah,
we've noticed that we've had a really nice range of accents, and that's another special interest of mine, is accents. So you having the accent you have and talking about beaches, I'm wondering about which ones you're thinking of.
Probably not what you're gonna.
Okay.
Brighton is my.
Oh, okay. My local.
I escape to Brighton multiple times a year. I've got 2 more trips booked for this year. But near me, my favourite beach is Saltburn because it has a really lovely pier. It's just a gorgeous beach, yeah.
And is that, Leo, were you able to tell Nikita's accent where that would be?
All I would say was northeast. I wouldn't be any more specific than that. I'm not that brave or stupid to volunteer.
Is that right, Nikita?
Yeah, it's northeast, and it's probably wise as well not to say, because I'm from
the wrong side.
Yeah, if people say, "Oh, you sound like a Geordie," a lot of people would find that very offensive. Yeah, it's So I'm technically a smoggy because I'm from near Middlesbrough, and we have that nickname because apparently we had the ICI, which was the big chemical works, and that would have like a big cloud of dust over it.
Is the ICI a kind of a factory?
Yeah, it was. It was a really big
chemical plant.
See, I think there was one in my town. Was it all over? Like, I mean, whenever I was a child, because I don't know why it's coming back to me. Why would I know that? Was there plants in different places?
Oh, there will have been.
They were all called the ICI.
There would be one of the biggest companies in the country, if not the biggest at the time.
Okay. Yeah. But now they don't. Now they're not?
They must have been absorbed by somebody. I don't know the story.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
You know, I'm going to go and find out, though, afterwards.
Well.
Otherwise I wouldn't sleep.
I know, but it's interesting. I remember that was, when somebody says something, I know that, but it's probably like from like childhood. People's parents must have worked in it, or it was something to do with the time. Yeah. So you said, in terms of your work, you said you're about to go into a placement with autism assessment. That what you said? And is that the kind of area that you see yourself in, or where would you like to be? What's your dream?
That changes so much, but I tend to stick with the same few areas. No clue where I'll end up, but at the moment, I would love to work with just neurodivergent people in general, like wider than autism, I think. But I'm also really interested in neuropsychology, so brain injury, or like the sort of medical side of things, so medically unexplained physical symptoms. I kind of have, really broad interests. And also I'm really drawn towards working in like learning disability services, but I've never worked in one, and I probably never will before I finish my training. So I don't know, maybe it would feel a bit like I'd have to be a bit brave to go there on qualification and never have had any experience. But yeah, I think most likely one of those areas will be where I end up.
It's lovely to see you talking about that, because your eyes kind of light up. So I can tell that you're right in it, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely.
You're just
you're
fizzing.
Yeah. I think it's, and I guess these things I didn't start out knowing about even. It wasn't until I was an assistant psychologist in I think it was called the Persistent Physical Symptoms Service, but that was working with people who had functional neurological disorder or non-epileptic seizures. So I guess that was an interest that I really picked up, because I guess with me, there's always an undertone of I need to be somewhere where I can be on a bit of a mission, where I feel like what I do makes a difference. So as an autistic person, I can see where I sense injustice around how autistic people are treated. I think that's the same around some of the stories I would hear from people who had been through the medical healthcare side of things for medically unexplained symptoms and been told things like, oh, there's nothing we can do, it's all in your head. And that is so far from the truth. So I think I'll always end up somewhere that I feel strongly about, that I can make a difference, even if it's just one person's life or the way that one team thinks about things.
Yes. It's the invalidation, that's something like the parallel as well, isn't it? And also there has to be a reason, doesn't there? There has to be a reason. There's something that they're carrying in their body, and that's where you coming from your perspective, like it's not just medical. So it's not, you've got so much more with that's the neuropsychological end, so you can see it through that. Well, what is this communicating for this person, and what else is going on? And that's, I think as well, what maybe maybe you're talking about is you've got to be on a mission. You're going to find out new things. It isn't a path that you're just going to follow after other people. You're going to get to be able to trailblaze a few things, or, you know, be with the people who are looking at the some of these things first with new eyes. Even just with autistic eyes in your profession is going to be, you know, still novel in the same way as in the counselling world.
So
the autism will keep the focus on your core values, and the ADHD will make you jump around to
good point.
new islands of exploration semi-regularly.
Yeah, I think that's totally the point, though. It's kind of why I got interested in neuropsychology in the first place, aside from going to an undergrad lecture where they talked about brains and being really impressed. I remember Googling how many clinical neuropsychologists there were working in paediatrics across the whole of the UK, and seeing like how few there were per, like, I can't remember how many people it would be, like one neuropsychologist per so many people, but I looked at the figure and thought there aren't enough. Like that seems like there are so many people going without the care that they need.
Yes, and then you add the autistic angle to that as well. Exactly. None. And yet, no, probably the overlap is high. A lot of those people with the medically, in inverted commas, unexplained symptoms are possibly neurodivergent. That's how their bodies are expressing it, because they're overwhelmed and they're taking in so much input and expressing in that kind of way.
And a lot of the things is, like, I know with myself, I don't always know what I'm feeling. And when you think about the link between like medically unexplained symptoms, it's fairly possible that at a point where I'm stressed, I might not notice that like me feeling anxious is different to me being ill. But when you add in like alexithymia and a lot of things like that, like it can be so different, and you end up with a lot of neurodivergent people in services for medically unexplained symptoms.
Yes, because it's medically unexplained through a neurotypical lens, but it makes an awful lot of sense through an autistic lens that the body would manifest itself in those kind of ways when it's not being heard in other ways. It's going to up the ante as well.
It's really interesting looking at things like non-epileptic seizures. People might call them dissociative seizures. I might call something similar I experience an autistic shutdown. And it's sort of like, how are we thinking about this?
Or even a meltdown. For some people, they might see that as a meltdown. What someone else might see as some kind of a seizure, or even like a kind of almost like a self-regulatory kind of a thing. You know, that there's just elements in it that for one person might feel like that, but other people be panicking. What are they doing? You know, but it's fascinating, Nikita. Is there anything, Nikita, that you were thinking that you would like to get onto? You know, that somehow if we could bring the conversation round, you would like to explore?
Yeah, I was thinking about sort of wanting to explore the fact that there are so many myths about what autistic therapists are capable of. So things like people will say, "Oh, how can you be a psychologist when like you struggle with empathy?" It's like, not everybody struggles with empathy, and a different feeling isn't the lack of. And I guess I'm someone who always finds myself preempting what people might believe and sort of automatically trying to prove that that's not the case. So I guess something around the myths and how exhausting it can be trying to be the opposite.
It's like there's a natural, well, in me anyway, I can see a kind of a natural defensive stance when I get into thinking about that. Do I need to prove myself that, or do I need to preempt that question? You know, and I was writing a thing, like a sort of a who am I for a new project that I'm doing. And when I was drafting it, this isn't what went out, when I was drafting it, I found that I was still using that, like almost like saying, yes, I'm saying right from the beginning that I'm autistic, and would you please let me explain that, because you might have preconceived ideas. And it was like I was inviting the questions that I felt like might come before they were even there. And I caught it, I didn't put it out, but obviously inside of me is that thing of people, if I say this, people who don't know me and have nothing to go on are going to automatically go to deficit. And then, because I will over-explain, I will have to let them have all the information in advance so that they can work all that through in this next paragraph, and then maybe give me a chance. And it just shows what is still there of somehow I'm going to have to address this, and I might as well name the elephant in the room rather than go through the excruciating process of it dawning on them and me seeing that, and then their awkwardness to try and suss that out. I'll just give it to you. But even that is not right. We shouldn't. Why should we have to explain ourselves any more than anybody else?
Or act it out? Because what you've just been saying, there's another version of that maybe that I'm sure I've had to kind of wrestle with, where somebody, whether it's somebody who knows you or somebody who's met you or whatever, has that reaction where you can't be autistic, you don't look autistic or whatever it is, and you can make eye contact, blah 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 blah. And then one of the reasons that I don't come across that way is because I've been masking for decades, and that there's that. But then there is part of me, so you're right, you want to see autism? You watch me have a meltdown right now. There's something about not playing up to, but like really completely unmasking and being really vulnerable. Not that I would do that necessarily, but there is a thought, well, if I do, then you'll take me seriously. But then you're in a very ableist way conforming to a stereotype by showing the bits that they will recognize as autism. Plus, you're being potentially obligated to be way more vulnerable than anybody else would be asked to do. And that's maybe what I have to do to be taken seriously in some environments or with some people, none of which is fair. So
none of which is fair. That's like me feeling like I have to write a paragraph about it. Just
exactly. But that's what you made me think of.
Yeah, just because. And
it's similar as well. I guess it's different because there might be someone else in my therapy room, because I'm a trainee. My supervisor might be observing, and so I'm thinking about what they're thinking while they're observing me. And it's all of that stuff. Like, you think about what people class as building rapport. And a lot of that is based on how neurotypicals would build rapport, because that is quite a lot of the people that will be clients. So I'm sort of filtering everything I'm doing. I'm like, I don't think that eye contact comes naturally to me, but I do give eye contact, but it's very conscious. So to the point where I'm like, right, relax your shoulders, nod, but not too much. And like all of this, internal dialogue. But equally getting to that point where it's just not sustainable long term to be that level of masked at work. And what you were speaking about, Leo, did happen for me at the end of training when I went on my career break, is because I'd got to the point where I was like, I'm so burnt out, couldn't open my curtains, couldn't get out of bed for a while, like any sensory input was too much sensory input. And it was like, do I have to get to this point to
get someone to say
autistic?
And when autistic people get to burnout, they are so way past what non-autistic people would consider to be the danger zone. When we actually start saying something, it's a few rungs before that, a good few rungs before that, whenever we're really not okay. And then I add all the masking until such times we can't mask. And the burnout's massive. We actually haven't, I don't think we've done an episode on burnout, which is amazing. But it's almost like every autistic person I meet, they've usually been through it because they're adults or they're in it. And being in it lasts a very long time, a very, very long time, like recovery. You're probably still recovering in some areas, but you're able to go back to work, because when we get to that stage, we just are done. And it's a big hazard. And so many young people, autistic young people in actual burnout, and a lot of people won't even recognize it in young people, but they've they get there, and then it's going to take an awful long time.
And this comes to the value of autistic therapists, is that I've been able to, I have the confidence now that I will intervene when a client is very clearly either in or very rapidly approaching burnout, to say actually quite firmly, and against all the humanistic things about not being directive, but to say this is a medical emergency that you need to take seriously, and you need to stop right now. And I, probably 2 or 3 times I've been that direct. And the relief, I suppose a lot of people, first of all, being trained not to be directive in that way, generally would be uncomfortable, but also be uncomfortable about, well, this is going to freak them out, this will make it worse. But the relief to be told that, as I was, this is where, it was modelled for me. You need to, this isn't just I am feeling terrible and I don't, just because I'm not in maybe physical pain or whatever, but to say to somebody, this is a medical emergency and you need to take action immediately, because the consequences of not doing that will be far reaching or will last a very, very long time. It's seeing that relief. First of all, that somebody's taking you seriously, but also that you're being told you are potentially very unwell and there is something you can do about it. But it needs to be taken seriously. And again, because it's invisible, the people around will not have seen any of this.
No.
They don't see it coming. And neither do we very often, because we're masking away.
Yeah, and I think even recognising that burnout is the thing that you're experiencing. So, like, before I knew I was autistic, I had experienced burnout, but I'd started to look at like research around the area because I wanted to do my thesis in autistic burnout recovery. And I remember my thesis supervisor asking me at the time, like, is it something you've experienced? And I was like, no, I've never experienced it. And then I thought, and I was like, hang on, I danced when I was younger and I would be in pantomimes for like the Christmas period, and we would just expect a crash at the end of it. So we called it a crash, but all of these times, and I looked back and I was like, oh, I have burnt out. Like, I just didn't recognise it as that. It was just being run down or crashing, or the way that we described it was different.
Yes. And then because it's also different, because of all those the sensory nature of it too, which is not recognised with workplace burnout and the type of burnout that non-autistic society talks about, then even to fit ourselves into that makes us feel, because I know that I had felt, and I definitely described what I had experienced in the past as burnout before I knew that I was autistic, and now I look back and say it was specifically autistic burnout, but I saw it as workplace burnout because that was the only framework that I had to look at, but I wasn't hitting the same markers, because it is very different when it's autistic burnout than when it's what happens when you supposedly work too hard or give. It's the saying that we give too much, but it's a much more faceted experience that won't just get better by not working or taking time off work. There's so much more to it. We strayed a little bit from what you said about people not being able to appreciate that we can be therapists, and whether that's to do, it's almost like what we do as opposed to who we are as well. Because I also thought, like, I never could do eye contact. It's only in recent years when I've seen recordings of myself and I've noticed how much I move, how my eyes go all over the place. And I thought, I've been doing that for over 20 years. Like, that's not just suddenly happened. But I never thought anybody could notice that, or it was bad, or it was getting in the way. I don't think it was, because I think that when you're with somebody, they don't need eye contact, whether they're neurodivergent or not. It's just these markers are just not actually the most important thing. And what we've been told is what you need to be a therapist is not necessarily what you need to be a therapist, and it's reworking all of that rather than it being about behaviours, or it's about us and the connection that we can make and what we can take in and contain for the other person, which is often not spoken about as much as it needs to be. It's like, can you demonstrate this in a neurotypical way? No, I demonstrate it because people like talking to me, but you know, not necessarily because I'll hold their eye contact or I'll, you know.
I guess I've had like such an affirming experience with the opposite, where I thought I was masking super duper well. Like I wanted to just kind of be I don't know who I was trying to be, but it was anyone but me at the time. I thought I was really on it, like really neurotypical at work. And then I went in and I said, I went for an autism assessment and I am autistic.
Yeah.
And the psychiatrist in the team was just like, I'm not surprised.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Okay.
But I was like really undercover.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe the blessing sometimes that comes with working in like a mental health service is people probably notice anyway, which kind of gave me a bit more will to just be like, well, if people are already noticing, I might as well just be me anyway, because they still think I'm good at my job.
That's right. They see beyond it. Yes, that's right. I think and I think that you've done some work then as well to be able to take that. It's because you've worked on affirming yourself. Because I think that a few years ago, when I was still really wrestling with my autism identity and what did that mean and thinking about the past, it would have really crushed me to think that other people were able to see what I couldn't see. And whereas now it's like, well, I know it. And so I'm talking about these people that are coming across me when I know it. But somebody like knew me 15 years ago and says, yeah, I knew then. I could see it. It was so obvious. I was like, oh, why didn't you say? And you know, how many embarrassing scenarios was I in? And I'd start to think, oh, were people all talking about it or something? Because you don't know how good your masking game is. You think we're obviously good to a degree, but maybe we're not as good as we think we are.
Yeah. I think I've been lucky that I've always seen the people who've said that as like nice people who wanted to be around me, like regardless, like I could be however, and they would still, I'm thinking about like school friends, and they were like, yeah, we've always known that you were different. We might not have known why, but like it makes sense. And also hearing like a friend who is now a school teacher saying, if you were my student, I would have like flagged this and you'd have got an assessment like way earlier, and recognizing that other people might not have to go through what I went through. But I think by the time I got my diagnosis, I think I was already at a point where I knew I was autistic. I wanted to be autistic because it explained more than all of the other things that I'd tried to explain it in the past. It made sense. So for me, when people now recognise that I am autistic, I think that's like probably such, like, it's the best thing because I am. And I'm not trying to not be anymore. Give and take, sometimes you still have to protect yourself, but most of the time, if it's safe to do so, I want to be me.
I so love that. I love the acceptance that you have come to. I suppose it almost feels like I'm talking in a kind of a parental thing, but I think like generationally,
there's a generational, yes.
There is that. And, you know, for you to have come to that, I can appreciate that you will have done a lot of work. You have worked a lot of things through in whatever ways you've done that. And to have got to this stage at this point and to have got to that acceptance, and it sounds like you have had, there's been some, you know, key mentors or, so your supervisor and your parents as well, and people that have been able to look back with you to support you to get there. And it's lovely because, you know, there's not that many people out there that have done that work by this stage and can go in without the kind of the needs. You know, you're not going in I'm not saying we all have needs, you know, but you've done quite a lot of your own work, and you can go in and offer and kind of take a little bit of the buffering and do that work that's going to be needed, because it's still hostile out there. You know, we find our communities, we find our networks, but it's not easy, and it's not going to be easy. But I think you've got a realistic view of it, and a really interesting voice, Nikita.
Absolutely.
I will say as well, I think for me, therapy was so important. So my own personal therapy.
Okay.
And I actually stayed with the therapist who diagnosed me for
yeah.
And that was the first time, like I've had therapy in the past, tried it, never clicked. I'd kind of just assume it just wasn't for me. But this therapist coming at it from the angle of knowing that I'm autistic, it was just such a different experience. Things clicked, and recognising that inner critic wasn't actually my voice, but the voice of like all of the things that I've been told over the years, and just having those repeated discussions. So I remember one time that I was saying, I just feel like when I'm off work, I don't have my purpose and I'm not really worth anything. And we'd sort of like distanced that and thought, well, would I think another person was valuable or worth anything if they weren't working? And I think at the time, like I was just totally stuck in this, and they were like, but valuable to whose standards? And I was like, capitalism. And she was like, how much do you agree with capitalism? And I was like, fair. Like this belief is not coming from something that I actually believe. So I think now, before I jump into, I'm so like bad at this and that's my fault, and that critical voice that used to be there most of the time, I don't feel it's there as often. I feel that I find myself saying to myself, it makes sense that this feels difficult because X, Y, and Z. And I think I'm a lot gentler with myself. And that took time, and it wasn't natural, and it was scary because I was like, if I let go of this inner critic, will I be as good at things anymore? Because that's what motivates me. And I'm glad that I did do that work. And I think it's like having therapy as a therapist is so important, but it's not required for our doctorate. It is counselling.
Yes, I've heard this many times.
But I've got so much from it, and I think it really helps.
Oh, that's lovely. Leo, have you got anything else before we start?
Nikita, do you want to mention the book?
I wasn't going to, unless it kind of organically came up, because I didn't want your platform to plug it.
But it's very relevant.
We're asking. Yes, please tell us about your book.
Oh, you've got one.
We both have, I believe.
Mine's on Kindle. Yeah.
Well, we released a book last year in November. It's called An Autistic Anthology, Neuro-Narratives of Mental Health Professionals. And it's got the stories of 25 autistic people in there, and they each work in a mental health setting, mainly from the UK, but some as far as the US, Australia. Yeah, thanks for letting me share that with you.
Oh, you're welcome. And you are a gatherer. You gathered these people, so you're the one that brought these people together to get the book published. So I want to appreciate that and say that out as well. So we'll put a link to your book in the show notes for this episode. Nikita, thank you so much for being with us. It's been really lovely to connect with you. Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Really had a brilliant time speaking to you both. So really genuinely thank you for letting me be on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Take care, Nikita.
Lovely to speak to you both.
Bye.
We're currently exploring putting together some groups for autistic adults online. If you're interested in finding out more about that, then you can go to our website, autisticlicense.com/groups, and there you can click on the link to sign up for more information. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at autisticlicense.com or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. We spell license LICENCE. We also have a Facebook community. You can search for Autistic License Shauna and Leo. Shauna spelled SIANA, or you can click on the link in the show notes.